I'm Kimberly Raftery. As Dr. Kelly said, I'm Lieutenant John Raftery's wife, and I'm so honored to be here today. I'm so honored that Dominique and Captain Khan asked me to speak. And I don't usually have a hard time with things like this, but this was incredibly hard for me to do. I would rather talk about how our family and friends helped us get through 2021 through John's illness. I'd rather talk about how John took care of me. I'd rather talk about how the boys stepped up and took care of themselves, truthfully, which I never really let them do. But I was asked to talk about my experience taking care of him, trying to keep my job, trying to take care of 2 teenagers at home. If you Google the term caregiver, they say that the top 5 top emotions are love, anger, sadness, frustration, and guilt. And when I read that, I thought, yes, that is exactly right. In 2021, when people would ask me how I was, my standard answer was that it was the worst roller coaster I've ever been on in my life. For John and I, the beginning of our journey was exactly as shocking as I imagine a leukemia diagnosis is for anyone. He thought he was having a reaction to the COVID vaccine, and he made a detour to the local ER on his way into work. The hospital had a strict no visitors policy during COVID, and that's where the guilt began, exchanging bags of clean and dirty laundry with the security guard in the lobby while he and I talked on the phone. He was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia in that hospital on February 10th. He was alone when they told him because I wasn't allowed to go inside. And the first thing he did was call me and tell me that leukemia is entirely treatable and that he was going to be fine. We made arrangements to move him to Memorial Sloan Kettering in the city that night, and I spent the next morning confirming and reconfirming with dozens of people their Byzantine visitor rules to make sure that when I got there that afternoon, they were going to let me through the door. And I got just that one visit when our oldest was diagnosed with COVID. And we went through 2 weeks of quarantine where he was by himself again in the city. That frustration, that juggling of plates, the guilt, that pretty much set the tone for the 305 days that followed. John was never less than certain that we were going to make it to a stem cell transplant, and he was going to be in complete remission. And my job was to make sure that reaching that goal was the only thing that he had to think about. On the more than 200 days that he was inpatient, my days began before dawn. I would check his blood work and call him, let him know what I thought the day would bring, get the boys off to school, get my 8 hours at my desk in as early as I possibly could so that I could start that 2-hour commute into the city early. Is that me? Okay. Earlier rather than later. And then I would spend the drive checking in with family and friends, letting them know how he was and checking to see who was going to take care of the boys that night for me. And the night usually ended around midnight after I had spent 2 hours curled up with him in his hospital bed, minding the IVs, while he had the Great British Baking Show on. I don't know if there's anybody in the room that knew him, but he loved Paul Hollywood. So that was his, peaceful time at night. We almost got to the transplant in July when his blast count dropped below 5. August was such a hopeful month for us. I spent it getting ready for 100 days of isolation, getting back to school shopping done, and he was really super compliant during that time, which kind of was out of character for him. A 28-year paramedic is not a really good patient. But when we got close to the stem cell transplant, he would eat what I put in front of him, he would drink what I put in front of him, he would take the pills that I put in front of him. And then we had another biopsy and his blast count went up. So the disappointment and frustration of that were mitigated by the fact that during that time, we got 30 days at home together. He had been averaging 4.4 days outpatient before that. So he was readmitted to Sloan for induction chemotherapy. And we had been engaged since December of 2019, but as Dr. Kelly explained, he didn't. It was his first wedding, my second. He didn't want a Zoom wedding. He didn't want one of those mini-monies that everybody was doing. And then he wanted to wait until he beat the cancer. And then on a random Thursday, he looked at me and he said, we should get married next week before I lose my hair. So my mother and I went to Kohl's. We found a beautiful white dress and some wedding bands, and we had to buy a whole set of smaller clothes for him. We set up a Zoom link for everyone that we wanted with us that night. I placed a DoorDash order from Ruth's Chris in the city. Who knew that was a thing we could do? And Reverend Ann came into the city. That was the first time I met her, was while I was getting yelled at that I had to move out of the way because he kept trying to see me in my dress. And security gave us a hard time. Gown, flowers, bags of food from Ruth's Chris. Chaplain in Class A's. Security thought we were up to something. I don't know what they thought. So that was lovely, and there was a little bit of happiness there for just a little while on the leukemia floor, which is kind of a big deal. He never stepped foot out of the hospital again. So he was horrible. He helped Joseph make decisions about college via FaceTime, and they would share a spreadsheet back and forth. He exchanged text messages with Nicholas, and he always texted Nicholas at night when I was leaving because Nicholas was a warrior. He talked scuba and sports and politics with his best friend Kevin, because Kevin spent every 2 lunch hours a week with him. And he always answered the phone at 5 a.m. when I woke up so that we could start our days together. And then I'd be there at night, and he'd shimmy over to the IV side of the bed so that I could sleep on his shoulder where I could hear his heartbeat. He never ever stopped telling the doctors that he was 50 years old, that he was insanely happy with his life, and that he trusted them to figure out how to beat his cancer. By late December, the doctors were quietly talking to me about their responsibility to first do no harm. They talked to him about his condition and the importance of a DNR, which he very purposely refused to sign. They thought that he didn't understand what they were trying to say, but I knew that he did, and I needed to let them off the hook. And I told them that I knew that he was asking me to be the one to make the choice, because he wasn't strong enough to give them permission to do that. I didn't want to do it, and I appreciated what they were trying to do, but he was the stubborn Irish guy hell-bent on surviving no matter what the odds were, and I was the one who loved him enough to be stronger than he could be. I expected it to continue to be slow. I didn't expect 3 subarachnoid hemorrhages overnight the week of Christmas. I didn't expect him to tell me that his pain was 38 out of 10 when he broke through the painkillers. And I never expected to have a conversation with the chairman of the ethics committee about the abuse of blood products and my rights and responsibilities about his end-of-life care. And it was the worst conversation I've ever had in my life. On Christmas Eve, I got to the hospital really early. He was back on the regular floor, heavily sedated and resting. I sat with him and held his hand and started to collect my things to go spend Christmas Eve with my family because my mother was beating non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at the same time. And I was washing his face before I left, and he opened his eyes really big. And I got a full 2-dimple grin. He looked surprised to see me. And he said, "I love you." And I said, "I love you more." And he closed his eyes and he went to sleep. And that was the last gift I got from him. I went back to the hospital early Christmas morning, and I didn't leave for 2 days until my sisters made me and told me that I had to go home and sleep in my own bed. And that's when he finally let go, which is what everybody says, right? They're not going to let go while you're in the room. In the 14 months since he's been gone, I'm learning how to start the days without panicking, without checking a million things. I'm working on getting through more consecutive days without crying. Not having too many things to do and too little time to get it done in is starting to feel less strange. We talk about him every day, we laugh about him every day, we make fun of him every day, and we say things that he said every day, which makes it feel like he's still with us. And out of all of this pain and chaos, I am so appreciative to the Nelsons and the Olsons and the Earlys and everybody at the FAU, because they're giving us the opportunity to do something good with all of this pain and chaos and paperwork, so much paperwork. So I've mostly replaced the guilt and the panic and the frustration with love and gratitude. Gratitude for a chance for good to come from this, and gratitude for the time that I got to spend with them.